So the idea is of today, we're going to just announce that we're doing our product launch for the P3 governance course. So the course has been around for a little while. This is going to be us. We've been kind of selling it on behalf of other people, but we are now actually going to be delivering it ourselves with using our own trainer. So we'll be producing our materials based on the syllabus, etc. So I thought today would be a good time for those of you who might have seen it around, wondered what it's about, really kind of tell you kind of why it came about, what's happening, and what you might need to know before you want to decide to go on the course or get somebody on your team on the course. So my name's Eileen Roden. I work for with PMO Learning. I'm one of the directors and co-founders. The other one, actually, Lindsay's also on with us today and will be answering questions. I worked for several years in and around PMOs, and then for the last 17 years I've kind of moved over and done consultancy and training. And I was very fortunate to go on the very first certification course last year and became both an accredited practitioner, but also with some further work, also have become an accredited trainer for the P3 governance. Now, Garrett's going to love me, but you'll see Garrett is also on the course. Garrett is our other accredited trainer who will be also getting involved in deliveries as well. So there'll be two of us doing the deliveries. So you can kind of see us both. Any questions for either of us, kind of feel free. In terms of PMO Learning, again, for those of you who are not fully aware of who we are a very specialist training company. We only do things that are relevant and applicable for people who work in and around PMOs. That's our pure focus. We go and find courses, or we create courses that we think will be helpful to the PMO community. And to make sure that it's absolutely right for all of the delegates, all of our trainers who deliver any of our courses either currently have or have worked in a PMO. So you're actually being taught by real practitioners rather than just kind of people who've kind of read the theory. And I think, you know, that becomes an important part of what we do here. Even with those certification courses, we are very conscious that it's really nice to have the certificate and the badge that you can kind of put all over LinkedIn. That kind of makes you look great. But actually, the real reason why we're doing these courses and the real reason why the delegates attend is because at the end of the day, you want to go back into the workplace and actually be able to do things and apply them. So we make sure that we have a really interactive sessions. We do lots of exercises, lots of contribution to make sure that you really understand what's required to pass the exam, but actually a really kind of a useful application of that for the organization as well. And we have now become not just have we got the trainers accredited, but we've also got the organization accredited. So it's there. We're authorized by the accreditation body to actually deliver the courses and set the exams. So today I'm just going to kind of cover off what the certification involves, and naturally, as you'll see, Alberto's pictures there. He's actually kind of holding the kind of the P3G book. I'll give you a kind of a quick introduction of what's in the book, because essentially that's what's covered on the course. So what is P3G? So I've taken the definition straight out of the textbook. It's all of those arrangements that are defined by an organization that actually understands and actually kind of creates the rules around what investments are made within projects, programs, and the overall portfolio. It's a system of arrangements that also not only kind of sets those rules into account, but importantly, and what is often missing in organizations, is actually the ways in which they hold individuals to account to actually make sure they're actually kind of following the framework. And it's all about being having effective and efficient decision making, which is done by the right people at the right time with the correct information. So as a PMO training organization, why do we think, or why have we chosen this certification? Well, it's really because the P3G certification is all about P3 governance, which, as we know within the competency framework, is a key aspect of PMO roles. So the PMO manager, particularly, who will be working with the organisation to set up the governance for projects and programmes, the PMO director, who will be doing it from an organisational level, but actually even the kind of the analysts and the administrators are also going to be working within that governance and supporting the governance in the projects, programmes and portfolio. And therefore it's a key area of competence for anybody who's working in and around PMO. So it just makes perfect sense that we would undertake this. And it's a standard certification course with exams and a certification body. And I think the important thing that I think we bring from PMO Learning doing it is that we have a real understanding of the PMO perspective about why these particular elements are important and how we would use them in a work environment. So kind of going back to kind of what we said at the beginning, in that, yes, we can kind of learn the theory, and absolutely we need to understand that for the exam, but it's the application of that theory that becomes really important. And as I say, we will bring that from a PMO perspective. So let's just talk a little bit about the certification. So the idea is that going through the certification will provide individuals with the knowledge and understanding who are going to be able to design, implement and operate effective and efficient governance arrangements. So you'll see there, in terms of kind of certainly around the design, we're talking about PMO director, PMO manager. Implement and operate, it'll be PMO manager, PMO analyst, and working within that will be the PMO administrator. So it can work for an individual project, or as it says there, across the whole organization. So really kind of it's a fascinating look at the kind of the different levels of implementing the governance. And I think one of the things that we've all come across in a practitioner perspective is, if it's not in alignment, it can make things a little bit difficult. So again, having a holistic approach and recognizing the alignment between the P3 governance and corporate governance becomes an important part of making it both effective and efficient. So who's it aimed for? And we recognize that, you know, we're there in terms of kind of from a PMOs and their staff, so we're definitely in that bucket. But actually, because of the breadth of material that's covered in the textbook and in the syllabus, it's really anybody who's involved in that governance structure. So right from kind of main boards and subcommittees who are interested at a portfolio level, to anybody who's involved in any of the governance bodies, so whether that be a project board or a program board or a stage review board, change board, anybody who's involved in the governance will find that useful. So not always just kind of project and program people, there are kind of the wider organization individuals who may also be on the course as well. So it is gives you a kind of a full picture. It's not just a kind of a narrow view of governance, it's the full P3 governance. Now, in terms of one of the things that I always like about certain books is the fact that they're actually produced by practitioners. And so this was written by two very well experienced individuals who have lived and breathed governance over the years. So Ross is a published author on project governance, not just with this book. He's written lots of papers for the UK Cabinet Office, reviewed and understands the whole kind of portfolio, project and programme management, been involved in OGC and writing the AXLOS Best Management Practice, and a reviewer. Adrian is based, it always amazes me how they managed to do this, because Adrian's actually based over in Australia, so based over in Brisbane. But again, he's a recognised industry advisor, and he's got board member and executive experience for over 30 years. And he really is about kind of making sure that the portfolio delivers, and the right governance is essential for that. So two very well experienced individuals who've written it, as I say, from a practitioner perspective for fellow practitioners. So this is not kind of a theoretical study in governance. It's about, look, this is what works in the workplace, this is what needs to be done, and this is where it doesn't work. And I think the other thing that way it's worth recognizing, and I think once you've written a book, this means more than perhaps to you, is it's been published by the TSO, the stationery officers, which is the governance publishing organisation, who are quite fussy about the books they publish. You know, so they're not, this is not a self-published, I've just decided I'm going to write a book and put it out there on Amazon. They've gone through a reputable publishing company, which again just adds that extra bit of validation around the book. Now, I am going to talk a little bit about what the syllabus is, but one of the important things I think about books, and for those of you who know me a little better, know that I have a library of my own, and there's what is really good is you've got all of the kind of the best practice written in there, but there's actually a really good selection of appendices that are there for reference and for you to use in practice, again tailored for the organizer, for the organization. So it talks about, you know, kind of what you need to consider when we're pulling business case together. It talks about the potential different roles and gives you an example of some kind of role statements. It's got some kind of first draft of terms of reference for governance bodies, which you can kind of tailor. An important part, which again, people who know me know I'm always keen on making sure we are adapting the right kind of behaviours for the executing governance. It gives an example of a full enterprise framework, talks about P3G maturity, so you can actually do a, you know, kind of a self-assessment as to how mature your organization on maturity. And then there's some kind of standard templates. They're not quite downloadable yet as kind of PDF documents or Word documents, but they're certainly there in terms of understanding the various fields that you can create in your organization. So a really good, helpful book that's got some really good stuff in it, but also got some really helpful templates for you to use back in the workplace. And we do include a copy of the book with the course materials. So again, the examination, there's an examination board that's been set up. It's a recent examination board, which is Project Programme and Portfolio Governance Qualification Authority. Now, this is a new publishing and accreditation body focusing specifically around on governance. Now, they're in the they've obviously set up this certification, and their whole kind of purpose is about making sure there is a platform for education, idea sharing, and growth for governance professionals around the world. So again, they're looking to kind of link up people who are involved in governance across different industries. And they have set the exam, they moderate the exam, they'll mark the exam, and they will essentially assign you your badge when you have been successful in the exam. So, and I do think, I have to say, it's a particularly beautiful badge of all of the badges that are out there. Yes, I do particularly like that. So in order to get that lovely badge, there is an exam. It's not held during the course. The course is run, and we'll talk a bit about that. But as most of the exams are now online, you can actually choose to sit that at a time that suits you after the course. It's a 50 question exam, which you've got 90 minutes. Now, I always kind of think some exams you've got less than a minute per question. This is 50 questions in 90 minutes, which means the questions need a bit of thinking about. So it's a recognised exam. It's not just to kind of turn up and you know, kind of write your name at the top and you've passed. Now, I don't want to kind of frighten anybody off the exam, but I always think it's nice that actually when you do an exam, you actually think it's a certification worth getting. So it's nice to say that actually there's a level of rigor around the exam and the accreditation. So it actually kind of, the badge actually kind of means something. And in terms of kind of what that actually does mean, when we're looking at kind of what the successful candidate having that badge means, it basically says we understand the theory and practice of P3 governance. And as I say, it lists there all of the things that people can expect us to know and understand, and have an understanding about kind of how that's implemented across the organization. So, you know, again, if you're going for a governance role or a role that includes governance, you can kind of show your badge and say, look, this demonstrates that actually I know what's happening around governance, I know what needs to be done, and I know how to kind of implement that according to best practice, which includes tailoring it to be right-sized for the organization. So the syllabus is broken down into 4 areas. And again, everybody who attends the course will get the syllabus. I always like to give the delegates the syllabus because it's a bit of, it means you can hold the trainers to account. So you can say, I'm not sure you've covered this bit off. And we can say, well, actually, I think it was these slides, but it's a real kind of help. But it's also really good when you're sitting the exam that you can actually kind of go through the syllabus and just make sure that you're clear, that you know and understand all of the various elements that may be questioned in the exam. So the first bit is really just a kind of an introduction to the whole kind of portfolio program and project governance piece, recognizing that that sits and it has to sit alongside organizational governance. So we have, for example, financial governance from an organization perspective about, you know, who can fill in expenses, who can sign expenses off, who fills in a purchase order. Now we have to kind of recognize that that organization governance has to sit alongside project and program governance. So in terms of, you know, kind of who can raise a purchase order for a project as opposed to departmental spend. So that's a kind of very kind of a simplistic view, but that recognizing that link between organizational governance and project and program governance is key. It will also help get us an understanding on what are the benefits of having effective and efficient governance. So particularly if our organisation is struggling, we want to kind of spend some time in our PMO putting in place the correct governance. It allows us to be able to articulate that and talk to our organisations to get them to invest in corporate governance. It then goes on to cover, and essentially a lot of the book, the main body of the book is talking about the principles of P3 governance, and I'm going to take you through them. And we go through those in some detail, having a real understanding about what the you know, kind of what the principle is really trying to help us, what guardrails need to be put in place to help us design the correct governance for our organisation. And again, we'll talk through the principles, be clear, everybody understands those principles. And then we spend some time doing kind of a couple of elements around implementation. So first part of the application bit is how do we actually kind of implement them in their organisation? What does it look like? And, you know, kind of how do we decide how much governance, how cumbersome does the governance be? And it really talks about this kind of risk-based approach to governance. So recognizing if you're doing a 4-week project that's only really you and somebody else in your team, then really you want very light touch governance. If you're doing a big organization-wide delivery that's going to be very evident to the customers, then the level of risk associated with that project going wrong is much increased, and therefore you're going to have a higher level of governance. Now, the way I explain this is I've got several children. My oldest child, very old, Mrs. Responsible, and if I ask her to do something, I absolutely confident that she will do it and I don't have to worry about it. I also have a son, bless him, who I have to say has grown up to be a great human being, but actually when he was younger needed an awful lot more supervision. And so it was a case of, have you done this? Right, then have you done the next stage? And have you checked this? Because he just needed a higher level of governance, because there was a much greater risk that he was going to forget something and miss something. And that's this whole kind of risk-based approach. So looking at the size and the scale of the project, how big and ugly it is, what's the chances of failure? Have we done this before? Really start setting up kind of what kind of scale of governance is required. And once we've kind of done that level of assessment about making sure we know how to kind of scale the various principles, put them in place, operate them, and make sure that it's effectively documented and communicated out to all of the people who know it. So again, you know, that kind of implementation section, once you've got through the understanding, is a really important element from a PMO perspective to understand how we're going to implement this governance in organizations. And then the last section, which I really think, even though we will talk through kind of practical examples as we go through, in the textbook and in the course, there are some very explicit examples of some case studies where the authors have actually kind of demonstrated that this works in real life. So for each of the case studies provided, there's an explicit demonstration of kind of how each of the principles have been applied, what rules have been put in place, the processes that have been implemented, and really importantly from my perspective is actually some real kind of observations in terms of, well, actually we did this is how it worked, and actually these are the lessons we learned from doing that implementation. So they're put up there as kind of real open book kind of case studies for you to kind of recognize not everything went wonderfully. Actually, we needed to think about this perhaps a little bit more based on that implementation. So I think there's a real kind of honesty around those kind of 4 case studies. So I think, as I say, from a PMO perspective, understanding the theory is great, but really understanding about how we're going to have to use that in our organization is really where the kind of the value of this course might be. So I just to kind of again give you a little bit more depth of kind of what's involved in the course, I just thought I'd quickly run through the 10 principles. I'm not going to talk to you in any great detail about them. I just wanted you to kind of recognize the things that are identified, and for each of those principles we see whether they relate to projects or programs or including in the portfolio. So the first principle, and what really kind of makes me smile, is I've worked in organizations where this first principle actually isn't applied at all. They don't recognize that actually the governance we have over projects and programs is very different from the governance perhaps we have in business as usual, not least that we have a different organization structure when we're delivering projects. We don't live by the standard organization line management. We have an organization structure that's made up of people from across the businesses, so we have to give authority to the sponsor and the project manager to manage that team rather than trying to kind of do it as a spider's web across the organization. So that's the first one. The second one is to make sure we've got a single point of accountability for each project or program. And again, from a PMO perspective, I always find this interesting in terms of there are a lot of organizations who still believe that, you know, the PMO is responsible for all of the projects and programs, and setting up effective governance says actually we're there to support the people who are accountable for delivery, and we're accountable for the environment and the processes they follow, but actually the delivery of the time, cost and quality and the benefits sits down to project and program sponsors and managers. The third one, again, going back to kind of recognizing one size doesn't fit all, or as my husband says, one size fits nobody. This is about recognizing that where accountability lies for determining the outcomes is really kind of feeds into the governance. Again, we can talk about the difference of projects and programs, but potentially they've got slightly different governance structures because of where outcome accountability sits. There is definitely a feeling that any accountable person, so any project manager or program manager, is supported by an appropriate governance board to provide, and you know, it's written into all of the best practice, Prince2, MSP, in fact any project management methodology will have some concept of a project board where you've got direction and guidance from a wider group of individuals, not necessarily just the people who are actually involved in the day-to-day delivery of the project. And again, this is supported, and one of the reasons why the course has been set up, that actually it's useful for people who are sitting in those governance bodies. So if you've got project sponsors in your organization who perhaps need to understand what's involved, again, it's a good course for them. And this I thought was a really fascinating one that really kind of took me a while to kind of get my head around. And then when it clicks, it just made perfect sense. Is there's a difference between people who make the decisions and the wider stakeholders. And stakeholders definitely have an interest and have potentially some influence, but actually decision making is very different from kind of stakeholder the engagement piece. So that's another, as I said, you know, I love the fact that, you know, kind of regardless of where we sit in our careers, we're always learning. So again, that was another point that I just kind of found really kind of interesting, that I've not kind of had that explicitly stated before. Number 6, I think it is kind of one we've heard, but again, kind of stated explicitly for reference, is that all of the investments need to align to strategic objectives. And I still think there are organizations out there where strategic objectives are perhaps not as clearly articulated, perhaps, as we might want them to, but we need to kind of have an understanding of what the strategy is if we want to put the right governance in place to align those investments. And of course, the good old kind of appears, I think, in almost kind of every best practice about having the business case and the purpose of the business case in that governance piece. And I really like this this 8th one in terms of recognizing that the only reason why we're investing in projects and programs is because we want those investment outcomes. We're not doing it just because we want to kind of play projects, or not just because we want a particular product. We're investing in that because we want the outcomes for the organization. And again, lots of organizations are still, and I've worked with a number where we've said, you know, kind of, you know, what do you have at the end of the project? And, you know, they said, well, we're just grateful for anything, really. And then there's not really the focus of actually kind of going, finishing off that and saying, well, actually, we've made a change. We're now driving to make sure we see improvements or a kind of a cost reduction or whatever that is. So again, that whole kind of portfolio governance is making sure we're not doing the pet projects, but we're actually doing the things that make a decision. So principle 9 is all about making sure we have a consistent and some logical decision-making rates in the organization. Now, we talk a bit about pet projects. We recognize that actually almost in every decision making there is a level of emotion involved. However, what we need to set up in the governance framework is make sure that it's very clear in terms of kind of who, what, where and why around those kind of decisions, and that kind of is a logical approach. So when we're in the decisions, we have to manage the emotions, but actually the governance framework is based on logical decision making around who's in what position in the project, but also from an operational perspective. And when we're making those decisions, it needs to be evidence-based. Now, we've all kind of, I'm sure, heard about this, the data-driven world that we're all kind of moving towards, and the embracing of AI. And again, it's about, I was at a couple of events last week where we were talking a bit about AI and how much confidence we can have perhaps in some of the information that's sometimes provided. So again, this importance about making sure it's evidence-based. We know the provenance of the information that's been provided on the course. On the decision making. So that's kind of those 10 principles essentially provide the essence of the course and are the basis for the book, but also in terms of, as I say, the implementation and the case studies that we're going to look at. So we're running the course as a 2-day course. There's a lot in there for 2 days. The first day we'll cover off, we'll do all of the kind of the standard kind of welcome and agenda, and we'll do the kind of the introduction to P3G, so the first kind of couple of sections, and then we'll start on the P3 principles. Now, interestingly, in terms of we are hoping to get through kind of at least kind of 5 of the principles on day 1, but we'll flex that depending on the conversations that we're having. There is, and I always kind of make a pains to say this, there will be homework on the evening. So there's an expectation that you'll be doing some practice exam questions that first night. And the reason why we do that is twofold. It means that we can kind of do some talking around the actual kind of the things that we're learning. And what we'll do the next morning, we'll always kind of go through those questions, but actually those practice exam questions are really important, from a trainer, so we know about we know that the learning is kind of sinking in, but also to kind of give you some confidence that it's sinking into your head and you can understand what the question structure is about. So as we go into day 2, we finish off the principles and we then talk about the implementation and the case studies. And we will be taking the opportunity, not just as we go through the course, but particularly in that kind of application, to give the delegates the opportunity to think about how it might apply in the organisation. So Ramona, you've just asked that question in terms of how they relate to the MOP principles. And much as I will actually kind of follow in this, I'll kind of do an alignment between the two, but they will sit, they'll not counter, what's that? Not counteract, what's the word, where they'll not, and they're not in opposition to the MOP principles. They will kind of sit in line with those, but I'll do a piece afterwards where we can have that. Yeah. There we go. Compatible, but not 100% overlapping. Thank you, Gareth. There's a word I was thinking about in terms of where it doesn't, they're not kind of competing against each other. So the first course, the pilot course, currently they're running, Ross and is actually kind of running 3-day courses, and I know we're selling that on the PMO Learning website. The first one that we're kind of delivering with kind of PMO materials, again with perhaps with that added PMO insight, is going to be on the 18th and 19th of September. So that kind of gives us time through some holidays to get the delegates signed up on board, get the materials developed and out to them, and making sure we're come back after the summer holidays ready to kind of go into our learning. So that's the first date we'll be running the course in September. Now, the other thing is, because it's the pilot course, it's the first time we've run it, and they're always good fun for the trainers running that pilot course. We have got a special price of $999. The official course price, I think, is $1,150, and Charles can correct me if I've not got that right, but we do a discount because it's the pilot course. So if you're interested, worth signing up for that pilot course. Any questions in terms of the content, the course materials? As I say, we've got the other trainer on here. We've got Alberto, who's from P3G QA. If there's any questions around the exam arrangements or the whole certification themselves. Any other questions? We're all happy? Excellent. Well, if you do got any questions, I'm going to put the contact details up at the minute. Just a reminder that through the summer, we're still continuing to run our courses. So we've got Essentials for Analysts that is running in 2 weeks' time. We've got Essentials for Administrator running the 12th of June, our Specialist Lean Agile course on the 19th and 20th of June, and our Specialist Assurance courses for PMO professionals on the 26th and the 27th. And you'll see we're very much kind of focused on our PMOs, both in the kind of the certification and specialist courses. If you're interested, and it includes the P3G course, so if you want your kind of family of people who are from a work perspective, so you've got more than 6 people who are you want to put through the course, we can do an in-house course, so we can actually come and do it face-to-face in your organization, and that allows us to have some kind of very specific case studies. We can kind of, instead of kind of doing generic exercises, we can do them especially for your organization. I always enjoy delivering kind of in-house courses because the conversations get very real a lot of the times when you're kind of talking about that, because you talk about kind of very specific instances about challenges you've had, and people in the room kind of recognize that. So it typically works out if you've got 6 or more delegates, it becomes possible to do them in-house. But even if you're not doing in-house courses, what we do after the course, we have some additional services where we can work with your organization to help them implement the theory that's been learned. Or if you're kind of there as a PMO manager or PMO analyst, and you want some one-to-one coaching as you're implementing that, then we can kind of do some coaching with you as well. So all of the courses that we deliver in the public courses are delivered online. For the in-house courses, we are prepared to go and we do those kind of face-to-face. But all of the PMO public courses are actually delivered online. Thank you for that prompt, Ramona. That's a good question. If you do have any more questions, you can contact us on inquiries@pmolearning.co.uk. Charles and Jen will kind of pick those up and return. We've got our telephone number if you want to contact us. The details of the course, the syllabus, and further information can be found on our website. So short and sweet, but thank you very much. I hope I've not disturbed your lunchtime, and hopefully we'll see some of you in the classroom.